Herb, and I'll be talking with you about the 6 steps to your commission implementation, which is effectively a guideline for the rest of us on how to gather requirements.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, this is Doug Herb, and I'll be covering 6 steps to your commission implementation. And this is a guideline for us on how to implement and roll out a commission system. So before we get into what the 6 steps are, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've actually been implementing these systems for over 15 years now, have served in anywhere from developing reports to developing integration points to doing plan design, plan implementation, and actually working with people to choose and select which particular software packages they feel are best for them. That's a brief about me, and I've been in consulting multiple organizations for over 15 years now, specific to the SPM industry. So what are the 6 steps that we view in selecting and implementing a commission system? First you want to do is gather your business requirements, which is always number 1. It sets the foundation for what you're going to be doing. Next, you want to understand your users and your sponsors. This is critical because these are the people who you're going to be rolling this information, these implementing systems for. They'll be the users of the systems. They'll be the people who reap the bits of the ROI of the system. You want to prepare for success with clear project goals, which is obvious, but a lot of times does not get clearly stated to the entire organization. Know your timeline. We'll get into that here in a little bit. Who is helping you? So this is a little brief of the types of organizations that can help you implement these systems, and then documenting and testing for success. So let's go ahead and start with gathering requirements. So prior to selecting any solution, it's very important that you gather your requirements. If you don't have them, you're wasting your time. And why do I say that? It's because without knowing what your requirements are, you really can't go to someone and say, okay, this is what the system should do or needs to do in order to satisfy my requirements. So important of those requirements are the following artifacts. Number 1, and what I always start with, is getting the existing plan documentation. These are the legal documents that you send out to your sales reps that allow them to review how they're going to be specifically paid and then ask informative questions around that. They sign that document, and it is the guideline by which you are legally obligated to pay them. You need to have those things ready and prepared for requirements. They will drive a lot of what you need to have done. A printout of all critical reports. This would be reports like your commission summary, your commission statement reports, any analytical reports that you're doing, along with an organization chart. So who you know who's on your sales team, who is going to have this information rolled out to them. And the reason why I put this in gathering requirements is because inevitably, if you don't know who's in the organization and who this affects, you won't capture all your requirements, and you'll see the detriment of that here further down the line. What do you have to build? So as part of gathering requirements, what should you build? You want to build a plan matrix, a current and end state definition, right? What am I doing now? What am I going to be doing? What will the system look like? Requirements document, which is effectively going to be your checklist, so that you have at the end of your project checked off all of your business requirements that were satisfied, or explained how you will satisfy those business requirements in a non-systematic way. Remember, you're implementing a system. That doesn't necessarily mean the system will cover all requirements. You probably still will have procedures that you have outlined that are human desk level procedures. Workflow analysis. What do I mean by workflow analysis? You're going to need to gather requirements about what people are doing, not only systematically, meaning, hey, you know, I've got an Excel spreadsheet and someone's working on it, but also what they're doing. Oh, they're attaching this file and they're sending an email to this person. Workflow analysis. You're going to need to build your project timeline, and again, we'll get into that here a little bit later, along with your ROI justification. Your ROI justification should include your key stakeholders and pain points. So let's look a little bit further into a few of these documents, like the plan matrix. A component plan matrix should be made up of the components that you have in the plans, as you can see here. For example, in this case, we have over 25 plans that we've identified. Actually, 35 plans that we've identified, along with 33 components and a way to associate those components to plan. The reason why this is so critical is it's the foundation for what you will be doing in implementing this system. It is a guidebook for those people to say, okay, here is how everyone gets paid. Everyone falls under these plans, and within these plans, there are these components. There may be similarities. Plan 1 and 2 may have exactly the same components on them. And therefore, you'll know you can go ahead and consolidate those plans in a systematic way. But you have to have a component matrix guide to be able to hand over to a vendor or to an implementer or even to your team to say, this is what needs to go in, and this is what's calculated in doing it. That is effectively what your component matrix will give you. And it will also help everyone who is working with you understand how big your plan, how big your implementation or your system will be, how complex it will be, and how long it will take to implement it. Gathering requirements in current and in-state analysis. So the fun part about this is I want to review this survey. If you think about gathering requirements and understanding your current state, what is your current state? What do you do? We actually hand out this plan document, and these are artifacts. If anyone wants them, we'll be able to give people here later, or just request them via email. In thinking about your current state, you want to look at all the people who touch that system. And what we do with this document is we hand it out to our customers so that they can say, okay, let me spur the conversation. What are the primary pain points that are driving us to a new SPM system? This allows you to think about what your current state analysis is. Okay, if someone asks me this and I'm working with someone, maybe they have an Excel-based system that's calculating. And let's say Joe, Bob, or maybe Mariel, or the people who are using that Excel spreadsheet, and they're attacking it in different ways. Maybe one enters the information, someone calculates for one team, and someone calculates for another team. And they're finding in their pain points that taking the information, moving it to a pivot table, because there are so many people inside the document, and providing adequate and timely reports is too cumbersome. So what we've just done right now is we've kind of created what you should have, which is a flow document that says these people inside that big box, that Excel box, are accessing the information and doing the calculations. You would have arrows going outside the Excel box saying that this information flows to your sales operations and your sales team. You'd have arrows going into the box because perhaps they get an email from your IT department and an Access database that they merge over, or even an Excel spreadsheet that was dumped out of a point-of-sale system. So you start using these questions in this document to formulate your current state of analysis so that you can take that picture, understand your pain points, and move to an in-state understanding. Okay, our biggest problem and our biggest pain points are that we have no transparency and that we're unable to provide adequate reporting in a timely fashion. Our end state would remove Excel and put, let's say, a SaaS application inside of the Excel box in which you would automate the creation of reports and the entry of information such that you don't need to do pivot tables or Excel handling anymore, and emails simply go out to your sales organization so that your end-state documentation would look like that form. So important in understanding that, and important in looking at things from your current state and your end state, and a lot of what this particular survey spurs is looking at what's your timeline, integration, compensation, and reporting. A lot of times people tend to overlook integration. And integration from a requirements perspective is incredibly important because it's what is going to be feeding into your system. We all know that some type of sales transaction or revenue will be coming into the system. We all know that payees or people, data will come into the system. How is it getting into the system? Is it an automated fashion? Integration from a current state analysis is incredibly important because as we've moved to a SaaS world where people are buying SaaS applications, oftentimes that integration and the manufacturing of the data that is current state and future state gets pushed to the customer. I've been on multiple projects where customers flat didn't understand how to integrate and get the data that they were getting, or didn't understand the manipulation of the data that they were receiving at the time. And so possibly someone was getting an Excel spreadsheet with flat raw numbers and was doing a line-by-line audit of taking one person, associating them to a territory so they can then get the appropriate credit. Those are the questions you need to understand about your inbound integration because you may want to automate that process. It could be one of your pain points. And it will be one of your points if you don't understand it. So that's current and in-state analysis. Now let's look at ROI justification. I put this under gathering requirements because if you don't do your ROI justification ahead of time, then you're doing a disservice to your company and to yourself. And the reason why is the ROI justification will often drive into the key stakeholders' requirements and will also determine your budgetary impact. I've been in sales cycles where there was no ROI justification done until after a vendor was selected. This is an absolute worst time to do an ROI justification because it effectively tells you that you have not gone to your stakeholders and gotten a final buy-in, that this is still a work in progress. And oftentimes, those stakeholders will say, oh, you know what, you didn't capture the following. So, from an ROI justification, making sure you do it in the requirements gathering piece, and before you go out and look for an actual tool, let's go ahead and look at an ROI calculation. So ROI justification will tell you where your pain points are from maybe calculations. And here's some of the things. Again, if you want this artifact, we can go ahead and provide it to you. Here's the example of someone who was paying or mispaying at 5% on $9 million worth of compensation annually. So their savings at an anticipated improvement of 75% would be $337,000, right? So you look at that, you go to your key stakeholders, you talk about improved quality, you talk about plan efficiency, talk about shadow accounting, reduced IT intervention, and time to market. These are critical ROI savings or forward-looking revenue generators. And so taking that information, packaging it up, and providing it out to your stakeholders and having it as part of your business requirements is very important, as it is probably your final checkbox. Did we improve our quality? One of the requirements was to increase our quality from a 5% error ratio to a 2% error ratio, which would then reduce our cost of commissions by X. That should be something that is in your requirements document, should be traced to and checked off. And again, here's the lovely little graphic of what that ROI would look like. This is a pretty simple example of an ROI. I would always recommend starting off simple and then drilling into, if necessary, the procedures that your own organization has for determining ROI. But if you can take it at the most simplest granular level, it's easy to explain this spreadsheet to people so that they can understand where they're going to be saving and how it's going to be beneficial to the organization. All right, let's talk about understanding your business stakeholders. Again, This is why that org chart is so critical, and I want to give you a couple examples here. There's always the stakeholders you know, which are the people who are funding your project. But you have to understand who the other stakeholders are, and those could be the people using the system, or that could be the sales organization who would be the benefactor of the system. And I can remember a group who actually purchased one of the commission systems, implemented it fully, rolled it out to the sales team, and had not gotten buy-in from the sales organization at that point in time. It was a pharmaceutical company. The problem they ran into was they implemented the new plans and not the existing plans into the system. The system was fine. The salespeople hated the new plans, and they ended up scrapping the entire project post-UAT. So when I say get the org chart and discuss the project at a requirement level with not only your stakeholders but the end users, because they have to understand what you're going to be doing, and they will ultimately need to buy into the project. The other piece of this, which is key stakeholders, are the people who will be funding your project. You have to, as I stated in the ROI, understand what their business drivers are. Yes, a lot of times it's, oh, okay, we're going to save this much money. But oftentimes, larger companies may have commits to the street. They go to Wall Street and say, we're going to be implementing XYZ system such that we save $6 million, or that we're able to increase our analytical capability, rolling out plans to the sales organization, and we expect an enhanced revenue of 3%. And that will happen this year. You'll see words like that, and you'll need to understand that they have committed to their shareholders, and that commitment will need to be a requirement and part of your timeline. For in the example that I just gave, you would know that before the end of the year, that system better be up, running, and paying, and happily. So that's understanding your business stakeholders. And as I just talked about, your business sponsor's agenda, right? It has to be your number one requirement, because if your business sponsor isn't satisfied, your project is going to be a failure. I can remember sitting in a room with a project of 100 people at a large insurance organization, and that group was not satisfying the stakeholder, and within weeks there was a substantial reorganization of the team. All right, so let's talk, and we're going to move off of gathering requirements. Again, those artifacts are available for anyone who wants them, to preparing for success. And the first thing that you do in preparing for success is your project team kickoff, right? So everyone's going to be sitting in a room in that team kickoff, and that may be, for a lot of them, the first and last time they ever run into each other. It could be that you have a very short project. It could be that you're all displaced amongst different areas, but it might be the first and last time, of course, that they work together. The idea of this kickoff should always be state what the end goal is. They need to know what the stakeholder commitments are, and what the commitments and what needs to be done by the project team and project ownership. You should be sharing the ROI justification with those people, because if they understand the ROI justification, they'll have a greater input into the success of hitting the requirements that are generally mandated by the key stakeholders. Again, this is a substantial way to communicate to the entire group really what the end goal is, how it will make everyone's life better, including theirs, and how it will move the company forward. The other thing that you need to do in preparing for success in your project is identifying the rational people. And the reason why is these rational people, and we all know it, I've been part of these projects long enough, there are rational people and then there are irrational people, right? The rational people are the ones who will help you get your project to the end. The irrational or the obstructionists are the ones who don't want the agenda, they don't want the system in, they, for whatever reason, just don't want to help. you need to be able to identify those people too and mitigate them as a risk. Again, the rational people, those people who want to help you and want the project to be successful, will be the ones who you should be at least sponsoring, working with on a daily or weekly basis, and they're doing most of the checkups with. You want to determine the best way to communicate with the team and sponsorship. I often say, depending on how long the project is, you want to have at least a weekly team meeting. You also want to be able to communicate to your sponsorship on a monthly basis. Encourage communication and require documentation. So this is an interesting one. The reason why I put this in here in preparing for success is because at some point in time, things will get sticky in your project. Always encourage communication. But after people communicate, whether via chat, in the hallway, or however it might be, make sure that everybody understands that if it is mission critical and not about what you did last night, that you should be documenting it in a spreadsheet, in an email, or some form of communication that should be then sent to the person you are having the conversation with. It really helps at the end of the day avoid any kind of sticky issues. All right, so let's move on to knowing your timeline. How long do you have before the expectations need to be met? And again, the example that I gave just a little bit ago with the key stakeholder saying, okay, I have committed to the street, by the end of the year we will be doing the following. In that case, you would understand that you need to work backwards from that date. Hey, we have a street mandated date of 12/31/2016, right? Or you can define the date by the functionality in your business requirements and what they need to be. That would be an example of taking your component matrix and saying, okay, I know that we've got 35 components. I know the average, 35 plans. The average plan takes 2 weeks. Therefore, it's 70 man weeks of what we need to do. How do we break that down into tangible dates of what we expect to hit and what our current burn rate is? And like I say here, remember the 3 critical pieces, which are time, resources, and scope. One of them in your project will eventually be pressed, and it's never time. All right? It's either going to be you can add resources, you have to reduce resources, or you're going to have to reduce scope or add scope. Right? So in doing that, what's always affected is cost and your ROI. Your ROI should always have a 15% fudge factor. And that allows you to be prepared for what will inevitably happen, which is increased scope, increased time. So know your timeline. So I was just saying that, knowing your time, and one of the things I'll share with the group here is, in general, when you do estimates, and I've been doing these for some time, you want to look at how much scope is inside the box versus out of the box and configurable. And you want to say, okay, I've got this many plans. Your average plan takes 2 weeks. Your average report can take a week and a half. And your average integration can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. That's a pretty basic guideline. Now, of course, complexity will factor into that. But again, it just depends on how you estimate and how complex those plans, how complex those reports are. But as a gross generalization, that's usually how long things take. And as you can see here is an example of a project week and a project workflow that we've created. Okay. Moving on to assistant. Who's going to help you? I put 2 slides in here around assistance and the type of assistance you can get for your implementation projects. One is vendor managed assistance, and one is, let's say, a consulting service assistance. The benefits of a vendor managed assistant would be one throat to choke. I hear that often, right? There's no finger pointing when it goes wrong. You can point it right back at yourself. It's the software and it's your services team. Vendors tend to have better access to engineering, a better breadth of knowledge of all the tools that they sell. So that means that not only they have the commission systems, they have workflow, they have other pieces that they may integrate into, and they've got a better breadth of knowledge of how all those pieces part together. vendors are going to be looking to get you up as quickly as possible so that they can recognize revenue. Well, what does that mean? That means that from a holistic perspective, it's important for them to turn you on and have you calculating. It may or may not be the best answer for you, which is you need to have a more holistic approach in how you do your implementation. So keep in mind the vendors usually want to get revenue recognition and again get you up and running as fast as possible. And they have a focus on the software and what the software is capable of doing, not necessarily what the business requirements are. From a consulting managed project, you tend to get a holistic picture and focus on desired functionality. So they want to understand what your business functions are and make sure that those are fit into the software. They, consulting companies, may only work on a specific application. Maybe they don't know how to do territory and quota management. Maybe they don't know how to do some of the other analytical pieces, and they just work on the commissions part. They can engage in finger pointing. I've seen it. I've watched companies that I was part of a long time ago point fingers. Oh, the product is subpar. It doesn't work. They don't try. And you end up in a meeting with the vendor, the consulting company, and the customer, and ironing out, well, he said, she said. Often the consulting service companies are a less expensive option to the software companies because the software companies have specific street requirements that they meet. The consulting companies, opposed to vendors who are focused on the software, are going to be focused on either billable hours or scope, right? So when you're working with one of them and you understand their services organization, how they get paid, the services organization of a vendor may be more malleable because they are focused on the software, where a consultant-based one is focused on billable hours and managing to a fixed bid. So moving on to documentation and testing. The following documents are needed for documenting testing. Obviously, requirements documents, traceability matrix. And what a traceability matrix is it tells you what your requirements are, how they were satisfied in a BRD, FRD, functional requirement document, business requirement document, how they got designed out, how they got implemented, where they were unit, system, and UAT tested, and where they were checked off. Your traceability matrix will take each business requirement and follow it through until its end state where it was signed off as a user acceptance test. Design documents, again, are that. You should have those documents that show the design concepts of what was implemented to any system. Those will help you as you take ownership of the system so that you can transition it to your team and understand why they were designed the way they were. Mock reports, of course, what you want your reports to look like, existing and future reports. Change documentation. Inevitably, there will come a few questions that during your implementation, someone wants to make a change. You will need change requirement documentation in order to be able to adequately address when the change occurred and why it occurred. A testing plan and handover plan and documents. These are all artifacts that we provide typically during any kind of implementation we do, and everyone that I've ever been part of would have these artifacts, and you should expect to have those. One critical point here is testing often gets neglected. Remember that your testing should be a three-stage process. Whoever does the configuration or development should do a unit test on that piece and have a unit test plan, not just throwing data in and running a calc and, oh, it did something. They should have a plan around their expectations. System test is often interesting because you'll have anywhere from 1 to 2 iterations. Well, usually it's 2 to 3 iterations because the expectation of, and again, this is where gathering requirements from your integration team is very helpful, the expectation of what the data will look like versus what was actually configured is off. This is where you would catch it in system test. And then user acceptance testing is often running the reports and validating the reports that they have the proper payout that you were expecting. In each one of these, you should have at least 2 iterations at a minimum for your timeline, because this is where you can buy time in your project with more hands, but of course more hands increases cost, but will shrink your timeline. And a lot of times this is where you try to bring in the project timeline in testing. I want to thank everybody for coming, and just reiterate what we covered. We talked about gathering business requirements, understanding your users and sponsors, preparing for success with clear project goals, knowing your timeline, knowing who's helping you and how to identify who you should have help, and documenting and testing for success. Again, we have several artifacts that if anyone is interested in any of them that we've discussed today, please just send us an email at info@landshore.com. We also provide workshops specific to what we just covered that are longer and get into greater detail. So people who are looking to select a software or walking through those artifacts as part of their project process, please give us a call or send us an email. If there aren't any questions, I'll thank everybody for their attendance. And thank you all.